This is your Chargers linebacker, Dan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, one final preseason game remaining for the Los Angeles Chargers this Saturday against the Dallas Cowboys. And as we had mentioned on our last episode, coming down to the final 53-man roster, we had talked about this when we were going through our offseason positional episodes, kind of breaking everything down, making some early projections as far as players that could ultimately make some noise. And now essentially we're going to revisit this after witnessing training camp, after going through both of these preseason games and seeing who the standouts have been thus far. And it's not going to get any easier as it relates to creating this 53-man roster, that is for sure. So we're going to talk about some guys that have obviously boosted stocks that maybe have dropped a little bit, and try to piece this together as far as who we think some of the biggest names are as far as the position battles that are going to be up for grabs with just days remaining now until the Chargers have to get their roster down to the final 53. So this is going to be an interesting conversation to be had, that is for sure.
Yeah, and the Chargers, the thing they have to remember, and that Chargers fans and folks thinking about this have to remember, is it's not just about the 53-man roster, but there's nuance to it too. There's nuance to wondering which players may end up passing through waivers if you leave them on there for other teams to get or not get. We'll see. There's a bunch of things that they could possibly do, and there's a bunch of ways to slice it. Avery wants to come say hi. Avery, come here. Hurry, come here. Okay. Come here. Here. Avery, can you say go Chargers?
Yeah, go Chargers.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. You're for wearing Chargers colors.
Yeah, she knows how to represent. She knows how to represent.
Say bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
There are many ways that this Chargers team can slice this. We're going to try to get to it. And this is all fluid, right? But there's some names that I think right now, again, if you snap the line, that might be on there. That might be surprising. Jake, before we get to that, let's pay the bills. Talk about our friends.
Want to remind everybody that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet for up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the UFC to baseball to Formula One racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game is over, head on over to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today. Get in on the action. Just make sure to use the promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV to get your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. BetOnline. The game starts here.
All right, Jake, let's get into this. Let's just go kind of position by position. I think this is probably going to be how we can find some
Best
names.
measure it.
Yep. Quarterback. How many quarterbacks are on the roster, would you guess?
I think as it relates to the moves that have been done over the past couple of weeks, I think that the Chargers are going to ultimately end up carrying 3. Now, we don't know which 3 because Dan and I have talked about this during our previous episode. While as of right now, you still have Justin Herbert, Easton Stick, and Perez on this team as it currently stands. I don't think that it's out of the realm of possibility, given how the quarterbacks have played thus far as it relates to the backups, that you don't go out and possibly get a veteran quarterback, or you see which quarterbacks become available on the waiver wire from other teams that you could look to possibly grab. Joe Ortiz has done this thus far over several different positions. I think it's a little bit indicative over what we have seen over the past couple of weeks that you need to do the same at the quarterback spot if one becomes available.
So I think because what is it? The new emergency rule is you can have a third one that's on the practice squad. Is that how it works?
Yes, it's specific as it relates to the quarterback position that you can carry 3 quarterbacks, and I believe it's however it counts against the 53-man roster.
2 technically make the 53-man roster, but third is on the practice squad that can be elevated in emergency.
Right.
Okay. So realistically, it's 2, but they can bring in 3.
Yes. Now, depending on if you looked at it right now, I would say, and if the Chargers just hypothetically didn't bring in any veteran quarterbacks, I'd say you'd roll with Justin Herbert, Easton Stick as it relates to the active roster and have Perez there. Again, that's just how I would measure it right now.
Yeah,
I know that people are going to disagree with that, and that's fine, and I would understand why.
I hope it's not that,
but in the big picture, I don't think that based off of what you've seen thus far from the backup quarterbacks that you don't go out and get a veteran quarterback or one of these quarterbacks that may become available on waivers here within the next week or so. So I definitely believe, as Dan has said, and which I fully agree with, quarterback 2 is not currently on this roster. So how this shakes up as it relates to Easton Stick and Luis Perez is still up in the air at this point.
Yeah. Running backs. We know there are 2. Those are easy. J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards. At this point, I still think Jarret Patterson makes it. And I think Kimani Vidal makes it.
Yep.
That's 4.
Yeah.
Elijah Dotson, Isaiah Spiller. No. Likely both can probably make the practice squad. Most likely.
Dan, how insane is it?
Maybe not, but
look, we thought coming into this year, our original projection was, first of all, how many running backs were the Chargers going to keep? And if they ended up keeping 4, because we knew that there was going to be a running back by committee style of offense that Greg Roman was going to implement, we thought that there was a possibility that if you kept 4, that your 4 would be J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Kimani Vidal, and Isaiah Spiller, because Isaiah Spiller's running style fits very, very well for what Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh want to implement. Now you fast forward to where we are today. Jarret Patterson is definitely a name that has been, taken up the ranks a little bit as it relates to where they're prioritizing him in the offense through these first 2 preseason games. His ability also on special teams that we have seen. Also, Chris Rim from ESPN has highlighted that several times. And Dan, how crazy is it that just a year ago, we were talking about the Chargers not having enough capable running backs, or who was going to take up the mantle of running back 2 when this running back stable used to look like Austin Eckler, Joshua Kelly, and Isaiah Spiller. And now essentially, look at the plethora of running backs that you have on this roster. Because as you mentioned, Isaiah Spiller, Dotson, who was a preseason favorite last year with many fans. People were very happy that they ended up bringing him back on the practice squad. But now look at the conundrum that you're in, Dan. I'm with you. I think that same Final 4 is what ultimately ends up making the roster. I think those are the names that have made the most sense and most production during the preseason, not just in the preseason games, but at practice as well. And I think that you're going to look at that versatility, especially of Jarret Patterson, that's possibly and most likely can unseat Isaiah Spiller from this roster.
Yep. Yeah, moving on. Tight ends. We're going to kind of go a little fast here because there's a lot of positions we got to get through. Tight ends. We know the 2, Will Dissly, Hayden Hurst. How many do you think they keep? 3 or 4?
This is tough because, and we should be keeping the tally, obviously, as we get closer to the final 53, so we make sure our math is correct. Normally, I would say 4, but considering that you have Will Dissly as your blocking tight end, Hayden Hurst, who can virtually do both as it relates to receiving and blocking, not as good as Will Dissly, obviously, but can still give you that. Will Dissly can also offer aspects in the passing game. Donald Parham, I think, is still on the bubble. I can't say for sure that I know about what Stone Smartt is going to bring, because I don't think that there's been too much noise around him during the preseason in terms of what he's done through practice reps or even in game time. And this is tough. This may be one of those positions where traditionally the Chargers have kept 4. They may keep 3. I think they may keep 3 in this situation.
If it's me, I think I'm keeping 3 because I think there are other positions that I think are probably more important that
especially
have more
one
talent.
You're going to talk about in a second.
Yeah, that have more talent on them, that are more talented and more beneficial to this team's ability to win than the ones who are currently on the roster who might not either have experience, might not be good blocking, or might not be good pass catchers. That's kind of the gist of it. But I would say 3 as well. Receivers. Well, hold on. Who's the third tight end? Do you think it's Donald Parham?
Yeah.
Because there's Luke Benson, there's Zach Hines, there's I don't think either of them are going to be jumping Stone Smartt or
all good options there. You understand why the Chargers ended up bringing them onto this roster because of what they're capable of. But I think that there has been a lot of talk about trying to get Donald Parham, bring him up to speed as it relates to his blocking abilities. It's when you go back and you look at how the Chargers tight ends blocked last year, I believe Donald Parham was your top blocking tight end, and it wasn't a pretty score as it relates to what it was. That just shows how indicative the blocking of the tight ends were last year, which is why you went out and got some of these guys. So I think that you keep Donald Parham because he can give you that extra juice in the passing game. We've seen that happen previously before. He's got enough of that connection with Justin Herbert that if you need to change up the flavor a little bit, Donald Parham would be the way to go.
Yeah, and again, this isn't us predicting the 53. This is more just us shedding some light on some of those decisions that this team has to make. And I think that's going to be a tough one. If it's 3 or 4, which I think it's going to be 3, it's probably going to be between Smartt and Donald Parham. That's probably at least as of right now, unless we see something crazy happening.
Yeah, and it's more so to make this decision because of what you need at other positions, as opposed to one beating out the other or one having another crazy lead over the other as it relates to what we've seen from practice. Because I really don't think that there's been a huge separation between Donald Parham and Stone Smartt throughout training camp.
And honestly, Donald Parham's been out for most of it. So
exactly.
It's always been the same story. It's about potential of Donald Parham, and he just hasn't been on the field enough. Receivers, big number. This is important. 5 or 6. It's got to be 6, right? It's got to be 6.
Dan, if this decision couldn't have, to make this decision more difficult, someone asked Jim Harbaugh at the press conference, is there a situation where you can see 7 wide receivers on this roster? And he said, it's not out of the question. He didn't shut it down, which obviously he's not going to show his cards or anything, but
it's out of the question. It's out of the question. There's no way.
I mean, look, it's not like we haven't seen other teams do this, but for a team that traditionally has first of all, has not kept 6 wide receivers since I think it was the 2020 season.
6 or 7?
6.
Okay.
I can't remember them ever keeping 7 on the active roster. ever, given what you need at other positions. And now we're talking about a coach and regime essentially that values the trenches more than they do wide receivers. That's they've shown us that. So I don't know. I will still go back to my original prediction, Dan, that I don't think that there's any way that you can't keep less than 6. I think you have to keep 6 on this roster.
Yep.
So then what is
6?
it? Then what does it narrow down to? Essentially, you look at the play from Simi Fehoko over the last couple of weeks, which would be a good indication as far as his progress, offers extra value on special teams. However, what we know from this team, from what we've heard from this team, and when you see his placement in there in the first team reps throughout preseason, I think that they're very high on Brenden Rice. If you were to go back to week 1, and even though Brenden Rice did not be able to register a catch during that game for a lot of reasons that were not based on him, if you just watched him through that week, this is some great tape for a guy who's not even seeing the ball thrown in his direction.
100%.
And from what we've seen from him during training camp practices as well, he's starting to build up some good rapport with the quarterbacks and make plays. So I may still give the edge to Brenden Rice here, Dan. And I know you have your own thoughts on this in terms of the nuance between who could survive a waiver wire cut and who couldn't.
Yeah. I'll bury the lead. Yes, I think Brenden Rice makes it over Simi Fehoko, but there's nuance, and this is where the preseason matters, but also doesn't matter at times when your quarterback play is less than stellar. You don't get a good judgment on the rest of the guys sometime. So Simi Fehoko has had a better preseason than Brenden Rice, arguably better than any other receiver. That doesn't necessarily mean that he is better than them. It just means that he's had more opportunities and he's cashed in on them. Brenden Rice, I don't think would clear waivers if he is not capped in the 53. There is going to be somebody in the NFL who likes Brenden Rice and has also seen what Brenden Rice has done at camp. Cornelius Johnson, I think, clears waivers. I think you're good there. I think Simi Fehoko clears waivers. I think you're good there. Brenden Rice is a name. It's a name. That's a name that some NFL team's going to want. I think it's 6. I think Brenden Rice ends up being the 6th. Again, in no particular order. Brenden Rice, Josh Palmer, Darius Davis, DJ Chark, Ladd McConkey, Josh Palmer. These are 6. Offensive line. Honestly, there aren't many,
You already know who your starting 5 are going to be.
That's easy.
You already know that. You know that Brennan Hymus is probably going to make this team as your backup center. You use Jordan McFadden essentially as a flex position because we've seen him used at fullback, at tight end, and essentially that gives you an extra roster spot for a player. So it's good to have that type of versatility there. So Jordan McFadden makes this team. You go beyond that, Dan. Who else has stood out to you?
I think Sawyer definitely is going to be there. That's easy.
That's 8.
After that,
Foster Sarrel is probably your swing tackle because he's been used already at multiple different positions. So I think that the Chargers value the versatility there. So I think he makes it. That's 9. I don't believe that Alex Leatherwood ends up making this roster.
I think that 9th spot could be someone that they bring in from another team's waivers, possibly.
To round it out at 10?
To round it out at 9 in place of Sarrel. Maybe. Sarrel hasn't been that good.
I fully get what you're saying there.
I kind of have the 8. The 8, I'm good with these.
Okay.
And then after that, I'm kind of I don't know. There's probably a tackle out there that's better than Foster Sarrel is going to get cut. But we'll see. If it's just with the guys we have here, it's probably Sarrel. Although Carson Barnhart's another name to look for. We sure as hell know it's not going to be Alex Leatherwood.
I think Carson Barnhart could probably make it through waivers, and
Agreed.
you sign him to the practice squad.
Yep. Okay. Defensive line. This is a fun one. And this is where that Tyler Tart signing impacts things drastically. We know Morgan Fox. We know Poona Ford. I think Tito's clear. I think Matlock's clear. And Tyler Tart. That's 5. After that, you've got a Boygby, who I can't imagine he doesn't make the 53.
Yeah.
That's 6. Do you think it's more than that? I think that's it.
No, I think that would probably be it. I think Tart kind of solidified that position. And especially if you think about what this team values, if it values the offensive line, it's going to also value the trenches on the other side of the ball. So I think all the names that Dan just rattled off right now are completely accurate. I think those are the ones that make the final roster. I think players like Michael Mason, Jarret Clark, as much as I have loved the fact that he ended up making the team last year as an undrafted free agent and also made some good plays at the end of this last preseason game, I think he's another guy that you could probably get on waivers. They don't make many defensive linemen the size of Jarret Clark, so it'd be nice to have a value like that back on the practice squad. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think that's probably it. I think they got a Koye. Michael Mason has looked pretty good, but he's probably a practice squad guy. Chris Hinton's probably practice squad, and Jarret Clark, like you said. Edge rushers.
This is where it could be an interesting decision, Dan.
So obviously the big 4: Bosa, Mack, Thule, Dupree. Chris Rumpf's in a boot. You saw the boot in this past preseason game. It doesn't look like he's going to be playing anytime soon. They say he's going to be out for a bit. Do you think that they carry 6? Or does Chris Rumpf go on IR?
I think there's a good chance that Chris Rumpf position on this team is in jeopardy. And I think that that's indicative of, obviously, his current injury status. But I also think of the rise of Tre'Mon Morris-Brash and how much you've heard of Jesse Minter talking him up. And we saw what he looked like in preseason game number 1.
Yeah,
the edge rushers kind of disappeared as a whole in week 2. They didn't really get much quarterback pressure. It was more about the interior of the defensive line. But it'll all come down to the decision on whether or not the Chargers are going to keep 4 or 5. But I personally believe whoever ends up with that 5th spot, that's the flex spot. I really don't know how many they're going to keep because, like you said, it's
I think it's
bad enough when you have.
I think it's 5 or 6.
I think they'll ultimately end up keeping 5, but that's a position that's a big question mark as far as the final number that you end up keeping. They could be totally fine with the big 4 that they end up rolling in with.
That's risky though, because I think
we've seen that before.
Yeah,
yes.
and knowing how Jesse Minter deploys his defensive line, I think it's gonna be at least 5, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's 6. I think Chris Rumph, because of his special teams duties, he's a core 4 guy, and he also got a lot of praise by Jesse Minter in this past training camp so far. And so, like the timing of the injury was unfortunate for him, but you said it. Morris-Brash, I think, is the other name to look for. And this is a big, and we'll see. I think this is a big week 3 game for Morris-Brash. And I don't think there's anybody else that could really come in and take over for him. I don't think, Andrew Farmer, I don't think he's going to take over for him. I don't think Ty Shelby would. I think it's between Tre'Mon Morris-Brash and Chris Rumph for that 5th spot. Maybe they keep 6. I don't know. Linebackers. This is a fun one. There's 67 linebackers on this current team right now.
I mean, my God, they're still signing linebackers to this roster this week. So it's like ultimately the way that you've seen this position group perform arguably has been the best position that has performed over training camp or these first 2 preseason games. Dan, as a reminder, this fluctuates between 5 and 6. Honestly, I can't see it going beyond 5. I think
I was just going to say, I think the 5 are locks.
Yes.
It's only if they go 6. And that might be between 6 and 5 edge rushers and linebackers. Like that might be where they figured out.
Yeah, and I don't think that there is enough time or enough that has been shown that you go beyond that. So your core 5 essentially is Junior Colson, Deion Henley, Denzel Perryman, Nick Neiman, and Troy Dye. I think that that's where you stay.
Next man up is probably Shane Lee, if there was a 6.
If there was a 6, sure.
So you're kind of getting the sense of folks listening and viewing, like the names that have a little bit more pressure going into this final week, right? The final turn, if you will, the 3rd lap. These are some big days for folks like Morris-Brash, for folks like Shane Lee, for folks like those backup offensive linemen who are trying to play for maybe that last roster spot. I don't even know. I mean, look at the running back real quick. I don't even know if they need to have Kimani Vidal play. Like, if it's me, I'm like that to me, that's not a race, in my opinion. I think they're keeping 4. But we're going to continue here. Corners. I think this is actually, honestly, this one's pretty set in stone too. This one doesn't seem as tough as we maybe thought it would be. I still wish they'd bring in a veteran. But as of right now, it seems pretty clear it's 6.
Yes.
ASJ, Fulton, Jaw Taylor, Tarheeb Still, Dean Leonard, and
Cam Hart.
Those are the 6.
It always usually kind of fluctuates because it between your corners and your safeties, you usually want to keep 10 among both positions.
Yep.
So do you go 6 with one position, 4 on the other, or 5 with one position and 5 on the other? Because this is where it gets interesting, Dan, because yes, if you say you're 6 for the corners, and then you move to the safety position, so that means that you would have Derwin James, Alohi Gilman, at this point, AJ Finley, and is it JT Woods that wins that position, or is it Tony Jefferson? Or do you keep them both? I would lean to your prediction in keeping the 6 cornerbacks and 4 safeties. It's all going to base on who gets that 4th safety spot. And that'll be the interesting thing. Because remember, Tony Jefferson came out of retirement just to come on this roster. And he was the only team. It was the only team that he ended up meeting with coming out of retirement.
Yeah. Safety 4, I think, is a big one. We'll get to that right now. So safeties, you got Derwin Alohi, obviously. And then the folks behind them, you've got Tony Jefferson. Thomas Harper has looked really good in preseason games so far. You've got Akeem Dent. You brought Jalen Phillips back. You got JT Woods, obviously, AJ Finley. But I think they keep 4 with the 6 corners. Derwin Alohi, obviously. I think AJ Finley has solidified the safety 3 spot. And then it's really safety 4 up for grabs. So that's between Jefferson, Woods, and in my opinion, Harper.
There was something that was indicative in terms of the preseason game number 2, and they even talked about this after practice yesterday, was they started using JT Woods at corner in certain situations.
Yep.
And if we go off of what we have known from what Steve Klinkscale has preached about that he wants from his DB room, it is to have them play multiple positions. Whether if you're a corner, you play inside, outside. If you're safety, we're going to teach you to play anywhere that we can because we want you to be versatile enough to step in those crucial situations should a possibly I word occur.
I like the idea. I like the idea of JT was on the outside.
I mean, he's athletic enough
on the
to play that position, yes. But that might be the difference maker of who they end up keeping at safety. If they're already testing him at this point in training camp at that position, that might give him the leg up. But I think Tony Jefferson is a great veteran presence to have
100%.
For the secondary unit. So I still personally put it at a neck and neck race for the safety 4 spot. Who's going to win out? And maybe this last week of the preseason is going to determine it.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's between Harper, Harper, Woods, and Jefferson. Right now, if it was me, I think Harper would clear waivers. I think Jefferson would probably clear waivers. I don't know if JT Woods would because of A, his draft selection status, and B, I think just the measurables that he has. Some teams going to be like, I can do something with that. He has the good size, good speed. A team's going to want that. And that's on display. And he was just drafted like 3 years ago. But again, you're starting to see we're rounding turn 3 here. And these are the names that are really, really, really up for a roster spot. Obviously, J.K. Scott, Cameron Dicker, Darius Davis, Josh Harris, they're all safe. They're going to worry about special teams. But I want to kind of just give a quick landscape of where we're at 53 and the names to kind of watch out for. So on offense, you're looking for that kind of last offensive line. Tight end room, you're looking for that last tight end spot. If they keep 4, we'll see. If they keep 3, is it going to be Parham, Stone, Smartt? Is it going to be one of the new UDFAs that they bring in? Who knows? Quarterback, will it be another quarterback that's on the roster? Will they keep 2 plus a third emergency one? Is Easton Stick or Luis Perez 2 or 3? I don't know. Defensive line, I think the interior is probably set now. I think the edge is fascinating because of the Chris Rumph injury.
Edge is going to be an interesting one. It could go 4 or
Morris-Brash,
5.
And I think it's 5 or 6. I think it's 5 or 6. 4 seems irresponsible.
Because I mean, you can't
have 4 with Chris Rumph as your 5th.
I get that, but you couldn't go 6 and then expect to keep 6 defensive linemen. That's just too much at that spot. So I think it's if you go 4, you keep at the edge position, you keep 6 of the defensive linemen.
Yeah,
if you go
Morgan Fox could be your tweener. I guess you're right.
Right, and if you go 5, that you're going to have to give away more at a different position.
Yeah, and I think that the DBs at 6 and 4, 6 corners, 4 safeties, running backs is 4. I still think there's opportunity at the offensive line position for that last number. Mm-hmm. And again, if they bring in a veteran presence at the cornerback spot, which would be
here's the beautiful thing.
I'll blow up the whole thing.
Here's the beautiful thing to sign off this podcast on, and if it's not a reflection of what has taken place with Joe Ortiz over the past couple of weeks, the amount of moves that have been done just since training camp kicked off, first of all, is ridiculous. And the fact of what the Chargers have already been able to find that is now giving difficult decisions as it relates to the final 53-man roster, we should expect that between now and after the preseason game is over with on Saturday, based off of what we've seen from Joe Ortiz,
something's happening.
Something's going to happen.
Yeah.
We don't know what position it is. We don't know who's necessarily going to become available. We know some names that possibly to look out for if they get cut. But this should give you optimism from the standpoint to say that even when you think the 53-man roster is done, it is still not official. So if we get to next Sunday or Monday, because we still have another week essentially before the NFL games even kick off. So you have this whole other week to really build your final 53-man roster. It's not going to be complete. That is for sure. So that should give you some confidence in how the front office is approaching this in terms of the overall roster construction. The job is never done.
Big week of training camp. Big preseason game number 3 ahead of us. We will be here to cover it for you. Lots of that and more still to come. But until then, you can find Jake at Jake T. Hefner, myself at Dan W Sports. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed. Have a good one.